The night air was thick with the scent of salt and wild jasmine. When Elena Rivera stepped off the ferry onto the secluded island, the waves lapped against the wooden dock, glowing faintly under the moonlight, and for a moment she just stood there, clutching her small suitcase, willing herself to believe she had finally outrun the storm inside her chest. For months she had lived in shadows of betrayal, of whispered conversations behind closed doors, of a heart that had been left fractured without warning. Tonight, this island promised something different, a place to breathe, a place to disappear. The resort driver was waiting with a soft smile and a placard bearing her name. Elena followed him into the cool night, her sandals clicking against stone, until the van curved up into hills covered in palm groves and flowering trees. She pressed her forehead against the glass, staring out at the silver line of the ocean. In the distance, the journey here had not been easy. Every mile felt like a step away from the version of herself that once trusted too easily. This trip was not about running, it was about rebuilding. Or at least that's what she told herself when the van finally pulled into the gates of the resort. Elena's breath caught. Villas with glass walls shimmered against the night. Infinity pools spilled into the horizon, and lanterns lined the walkways like stars captured and brought down to earth. It was the kind of place people dreamed about but rarely touched. She had saved for years to be here, and now all she wanted was silence. No phones buzzing, no friends who turned into enemies, no voices reminding her of the past, just silence, and maybe the sound of waves to stitch the broken pieces back together. The receptionist, warm and efficient, welcomed her with practiced grace before leading her toward her villa. The path wound through gardens heavy with night-blooming flowers. Elena breathed deeply, allowing the fragrance to calm her racing thoughts. But the peace shattered when the receptionist stopped suddenly at the villa door, frowning down at her tablet. "That's strange," she murmured, eyes narrowing. "According to this, the villa is already occupied." Elena blinked. "Occupied? That's impossible. I made this reservation months ago, paid in full." The woman looked stricken. "I am so sorry, Miss Rivera. There seems to be a double booking. The other guest checked in earlier today. His name is Mr. Damian Cole." Elena's jaw tightened. She had heard that name before. Damian Cole, the billionaire investor splashed across business magazines. The man whose wealth was matched only by rumors of his arrogance. Of all the people in the world, fate had chosen him. "I'd like him moved to another villa," Elena said firmly, her exhaustion sharpening her tone. The receptionist winced. "I wish I could. But unfortunately, the resort is fully booked due to several large events. At the moment, the only option is for you both to share until we find a solution." "Share?" Elena nearly laughed, though there was nothing funny about it. She had come here for solitude, not to play house with a man who probably thought people existed only to serve him. "That won't work." "I understand," the woman said softly. "But perhaps you might speak with him directly. He may be more accommodating than expected." "Doubtful, very doubtful." But Elena, too tired to argue further, nodded stiffly. "Fine, let me talk to him." The receptionist guided her into the villa, a breathtaking space with open walls, polished wood floors, and the steady hum of the sea beyond. But Elena hardly noticed. Through the wide glass doors, she saw him, Damian Cole, lounging carelessly by the pool, phone in hand, glass of something amber at his side. His posture radiated ease, like a man who had never once been denied anything. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his dark hair tousled as though the wind belonged to him. The receptionist cleared her throat. "Mr. Cole." He glanced up, his eyes the deep blue of the ocean at night, and for a brief second Elena forgot to breathe. Then he smiled, lazy and amused, as if already aware of who she was and why she had come. "And who might this be?" His voice carried easily, smooth and commanding. "Elena Rivera," she said before the receptionist could speak, her chin lifting in defiance. "The person who actually booked this villa 3 months ago." He leaned back in his chair, unhurried. "Interesting. My confirmation says the same. Seems the universe has a sense of humor." "This isn't funny." Her voice trembled with restrained fury. "I didn't travel halfway across the world to play roommate with a stranger." He studied her. the corners of his mouth curving in something between a smirk and genuine curiosity. "Neither did I, but it seems we're at an impasse, unless you want to spend the next 2 weeks sleeping on the beach. We may have to figure out a way to coexist." Elena's pulse quickened, frustration bubbling hot beneath her skin. He was too calm, too sure of himself, and it infuriated her. She had fought to claim this sliver of peace, and here he was, treating it like a game. Before she could stop herself, her hand flew up, striking his cheek with a sharp crack that echoed through the villa. For a heartbeat, the world stilled. The sea hushed, the air tightened, and Elena's own breath caught in her throat. She had not planned it, hadn't even thought, only reacted. Damien turned slowly, eyes locked on hers. There was no anger in his gaze, only a startling intensity that made her pulse race for an entirely different reason. Then, without warning, he stepped forward, closing the space between them before she could retreat. His hand cupped her cheek gently, unexpectedly tender after the sting of her slap. His lips pressed against hers, firm, unyielding, yet carrying a depth she hadn't expected. It wasn't arrogance, it wasn't mockery, it was a spark, sudden and undeniable, that set fire to the silence between them. Elena staggered back, breathless, her heart hammering. She didn't know whether to scream, cry, or collapse. One thing was certain: whatever had just begun would not be simple, and peace was no longer the only thing she had come here to find. The villa felt different after that moment, as if the air itself had thickened with something unsaid. Elena paced the length of the living room, her footsteps light against polished wood, trying to make sense of what had just happened. She could still feel the warmth of his lips on hers, the shock of it mingling with the sting of regret. She had come here to escape, not to become entangled in a story she never asked for. And yet, every time she replayed the kiss in her mind, her pulse stumbled as if she were standing on the edge of something dangerous. Damien, meanwhile, seemed unfazed. He had returned to his chair by the pool, swirling the last of his drink, a faint trace of amusement flickering across his face. The slap hadn't shaken him, and the kiss hadn't silenced him. If anything, he seemed more interested in her now than before. That only unsettled her further. Men like him were trouble, men who carried the world in their stride, who could bend circumstances without lifting a finger. She had spent too long clawing her way out of someone else's shadow, to let another man's confidence swallow her whole. The night stretched on, awkward silence weaving itself into the walls. Elena retreated to one side of the villa, determined to claim her privacy. She locked her suitcase away, unpacked only the essentials, and reminded herself that this was temporary. 2 weeks, perhaps less, until the resort fixed their mistake. She could endure him until then. But even as she whispered this to herself, the memory of his gaze, those ocean-dark eyes that seemed to read beyond her defenses, refused to fade. Morning arrived with the cry of seabirds and the soft rush of waves against the shore. Elena awoke early, determined to reclaim her sense of control. She slipped into her running shoes and headed out to the beach, the sand cool beneath her feet. The horizon blushed with the colors of dawn, and for a moment she felt free. The rhythm of her breath, the crash of the surf, the vast sky above it was everything she had come here for. But when she rounded a bend, there he was, Damien Cole, already there, shirtless and jogging along the shoreline as if the ocean belonged to him. She froze, frustrated at the intrusion of his presence into even this small sanctuary. He noticed her almost immediately, slowing his pace, until he was jogging beside her, matching her stride with infuriating ease. "Early riser," he remarked, his voice carrying effortlessly over the waves. Elena kept her eyes ahead. "I don't need company. Good thing I wasn't offering," he said, a teasing edge in his tone. "I was just curious. You don't strike me as someone who comes here to lounge by the pool all day." She bit back a retort, unwilling to give him the satisfaction of a reaction. But silence with Damien was dangerous. He had a way of filling it, of prying open the spaces she wanted to keep shut. "You know," he continued, "most people would have apologized after slapping me." Her head whipped toward him, eyes flashing. "Most men would have apologized for behaving like you did." Instead of bristling, he chuckled softly, a sound that unsettled her more than anger would have. "Fair enough. They ran in silence for a while, their footsteps syncopated against the sand. And though she wanted to pull ahead, to leave him behind, part of her was aware of his presence in a way that felt almost steadying. She hated the thought, but it lingered anyway. Back at the villa, breakfast was served on the terrace, an array of tropical fruits, pastries, and coffee so rich it filled the air with comfort. Elena sat at one end of the long table, Damien at the other. He seemed perfectly at ease, flipping through emails on a sleek tablet, while she tried to lose herself in the view of the endless sea. Finally, he set the device aside. "Look, I'll make you a deal," he said. "This villa is big enough for the both of us. I'll stay out of your way if you stay out of mine. No drama, no surprises." She raised an eyebrow. "And what happens when your arrogance seeps through the walls?" The corners of his mouth twitched. "Then you can slap me again." She nearly choked on her coffee. His composure was maddening, but underneath the banter, she sensed something else, a flicker of sincerity, a willingness to draw boundaries, instead of push them, for someone with his reputation. That surprised her. The days passed in a strange rhythm. Elena spent her mornings exploring the beaches, journaling, or painting on the terrace, while Damien seemed to vanish into long phone calls, private meetings, or workouts by the pool. They coexisted without crossing paths too often, and for a while, it almost worked. Yet every now and then, their routines collided. A shared glance over breakfast, a brief conversation about the island, a brush of shoulders in the hallway. Each encounter carried a weight she couldn't quite explain. One evening, a storm rolled in. The sky darkened suddenly, winds whipping palm fronds against the villa walls. Elena sat near the window, sketchbook in hand, while rain hammered against the glass. Damien entered quietly, his expression softer than she had ever seen it. For the first time, he looked less like a billionaire and more like a man weighed down by something unspoken. Without asking, he poured two glasses of wine and handed one to her. "To surviving this unusual arrangement," he said, raising his glass slightly. She hesitated, then clinked her glass against his. "To surviving." The storm raged outside, thunder rolling over the sea, but the villa felt smaller, warmer, wrapped in the glow of shared silence. Elena found herself studying him, the way his jaw tightened when he thought, the faint shadow in his eyes that no amount of wealth could erase. He noticed her gaze and held it, and for a moment, it was as though the world beyond the storm didn't exist. Something was shifting between them, slowly, subtly, against her will. The slap had been the spark, but now the fire smoldered, waiting for the right breath of air to ignite. And deep down, Elena knew she couldn't keep pretending she was immune to it. The storm that had swept across the island lingered long into the night, its winds whistling like restless spirits, its rain drumming an unending rhythm on the glass walls of the villa. Elena lay awake in her room, staring at the ceiling, her mind restless. She told herself it was the storm keeping her up, but she knew better. It was the memory of the way Damien had looked at her, the subtle softening in his eyes when he raised his glass in quiet truce. For the first time since she had met him, he hadn't seemed untouchable. He had seemed human. Sleep finally claimed her in fragments, but when she woke at dawn, the storm was still heavy and the villa strangely quiet. She padded into the living area, wrapping her shawl tightly around her shoulders. Damien was there, sitting by the window with his laptop open, though he wasn't working. His eyes were fixed on the turbulent sea, the glow from the screen illuminating the sharp lines of his face. For the first time, Elena noticed the weariness in his posture. "You're up early," she said softly. He turned slightly, surprised, though his expression quickly masked it. "Couldn't sleep." "Storm?" she asked. "Memories," he admitted, before glancing back at the waves. The word hung between them, heavy, vulnerable, unexpected. She hesitated, unsure whether to press further, but something in his voice, something unguarded, pulled her closer. She sat across from him, the silence between them broken only by the roar of the storm. Damien closed the laptop slowly. "You think you know me, don't you?" he asked, his tone unreadable. Elena stiffened. "I don't know you at all, but you make it very easy to assume." A faint smile tugged at his lips, though it didn't reach his eyes. "I suppose I do." He leaned back in his chair, gaze far away, People see the headlines, the deals, the parties, the money. They don't see the rest. Against her better judgment, Elena leaned in. Then show me the rest. He studied her for a long time, as though weighing the risk of revealing too much. Finally, he spoke. I didn't grow up with wealth, not even close. My father worked himself into the ground trying to provide for us. My mother did everything she could to keep the house standing. And me, I spent most of my childhood believing I'd never escape the place I was born. Every day it was a battle. Every dream felt like it belonged to someone else. He paused, his jaw tightening. When I finally broke out, I promised myself I would never go back to that life. And I kept that promise. But sometimes the things you run from haunt you the loudest. Elena felt a pang in her chest, unexpected and sharp. She had imagined Damien as a man who had never known struggle, who had lived his life draped in privilege. To hear the cracks in his story unsettled her. It made him real in a way she hadn't been prepared for. And yet, she said quietly, "You built everything they said you couldn't." He gave a short laugh, though it carried no joy. At what cost? Money doesn't silence the ghosts. It only buys bigger rooms for them to echo in. The storm rumbled above them, a low growl. Across the sky, Elena thought of her own ghosts, the betrayal that had driven her here. The one she had tried to bury beneath tropical skies. Perhaps that was why his words struck so deeply. Because beneath the clash of their worlds, they were both running. Hours slipped by in conversation neither of them had expected. Damien spoke of sleepless nights and endless pressure, of the loneliness that came with success. Elena shared pieces of her own story, the betrayal, the heartbreak, the moment her trust had shattered. Neither tried to fix the other's pain. They simply listened, and in that listening, something shifted. By evening, the storm began to break. The clouds tore open to reveal a bruised sunset, streaks of gold and crimson painting the horizon. The villa glowed in the fading light. Quiet now, holding its breath, Elena stepped out onto the terrace, drawn to the salty air, and Damien followed a few moments later. The world seemed softer after the storm. The sea, though restless, glittered. Under the sky's surrender, Elena leaned against the railing, her hair lifting in the breeze. Damien stood beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his presence. "It's strange," she murmured, almost to herself, "how storms leave everything looking cleaner, like the world needed to be shaken before it could." "Breathe again." Damien looked at her, his gaze steady. Maybe people are the same. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, an understanding neither could put into words. The slap that had once defined their introduction seemed almost absurd now. What lingered was this, two souls stripped of pretense, colliding in a place neither had planned to be. The silence stretched, intimate and charged, broken only by the crash of waves below. Damien's hand brushed hers, tentative at first, as though testing whether she would pull away. She didn't. Her heart hammered, but she stayed still, letting the moment unfold. When his fingers laced with hers, it was not with arrogance, but with quiet reverence, as though he had found something fragile he didn't want it to break. Elena's breath caught. This wasn't about wealth or pride, power or control. It was about two people, battered by storms, finding unexpected shelter in each other. For the first time since she had arrived, Elena felt the weight on her chest, lightened not because she had forgotten her pain, but because she had shared it. And as the last light of day melted into night, she knew one truth with startling clarity. Whatever this was, however temporary, it had already begun to change her. And deep within, a whisper stirred a dangerous, undeniable thought. Perhaps Damien Cole wasn't just the storm. Perhaps he was also the calm that followed. The island seemed reborn after the storm. The skies opened to a blue so clear it looked endless. The waves rolled gently as if nothing violent had ever disturbed them, and the air carried a sweetness that only came after cleansing rain. Elena wandered through the gardens that morning, barefoot, her dress brushing against the dew-kissed grass. It should have been perfect. It should have been the moment she finally felt at peace. Yet her mind replayed the night before, the confessions whispered over thunder, the warmth of Damien's hand in hers, the look in his eyes that had unsettled her more than any kiss ever could. She had not come here to fall into someone else's story. She had come here to write her own, and yet every step she took seemed tethered to him, to the strange bond forming between them. She shook her head, determined to push it aside. But the thought lingered like a song she couldn't silence. When she returned to the villa, she found Damien already on the terrace, dressed sharply despite the island's casual ease. His phone was pressed to his ear, his voice clipped and cold in a way she hadn't heard before. "I told you to hold that deal until I reviewed the contract," he snapped. "If they pull out now, it's because you acted without my approval." He paused, listening, his jaw tightening. "Then fix it. That's your job." Elena froze in the doorway, unseen for a moment. The man she had spoken with the night before, the one who admitted his ghosts, was gone. In his place stood the billionaire the world gossiped about, all sharp edges and authority. It was a jarring reminder that while she had glimpsed his humanity, Damien Cole was still a man with an empire balanced on his shoulders. He ended the call with a curt word, tossing the phone onto the table. His eyes lifted, meeting hers instantly. There was no apology for what she'd overheard, only a flicker of weariness that quickly vanished beneath his composure. "Morning," he said simply. Elena crossed her arms, quite the tone for paradise. "Paradise doesn't stop the world from demanding your attention," he replied, running a hand through his hair. "I didn't choose the timing. You always have a choice," she said quietly, for a heartbeat. Something like regret shadowed his expression, but he only shrugged, leaning back in his chair. Not always. She wanted to push, to remind him that life wasn't only about contracts and deals. But before she could, a sound interrupted them, the distant whir of engines, then the unmistakable thump of helicopter blades, slicing through the air. Both of them looked up as a sleek black helicopter descended toward the resort's private helipad, its presence stark against the serene sky. Damien's expression darkened instantly. He muttered something under his breath, then stood. It seems peace doesn't last long. Minutes later, the villa's manager arrived, flustered and apologetic. "Mr. Cole, I must inform you some reporters have arrived. It seems word has spread that you're here." Elena's stomach dropped. "Reporters on this quiet island?" She glanced at Damien, whose jaw was set like stone. "I'll handle it," he said, dismissing the manager with a nod. But his eyes, when they met Elena's, carried something heavier. She frowned. "Reporters chasing you to a private island. That doesn't sound like coincidence." "It's not," he admitted, his tone low. "There's a deal in the works. High stakes. My competitors would love nothing more than to spin a story that weakens my position. And dragging the media here helps them do exactly that." She guessed. He gave a grim nod. Elena crossed her arms, unease prickling her. "And what happens to me in the middle of this circus?" "You're not in the middle of it," Damien said firmly. "I'll make sure of that." But she wasn't so sure. Later that afternoon, the resort buzzed with whispers. Cameras flashed. In the distance, long lenses trained on the villa from beyond the gates. The privacy she had cherished was already unraveling. When she tried to walk along the beach, she spotted drones hovering above, their faint hums following her steps. By the time she returned to the villa, anger burned in her chest. "This was supposed to be my escape," she told Damien sharply. "Not a stage for your battles." He faced her calmly, though his eyes revealed tension. "I didn't invite them, no, but they came because of you. Your world has a way of consuming everything around it." She broke off, her voice trembling. "I can't be consumed again." For a long moment, silence stretched between them. Damien looked at her, really looked, as though trying to decide whether to let her walk away or fight for her. "Trust." Then he spoke, softer than before. "You think I want this?" he asked. "You think I enjoy being hunted, turned into a headline, treated like a symbol instead of a person?" He shook his head. "If I could trade every dollar to make them vanish, I would. But that's not how this works. The only choice I have is to stand and fight." Elena's breath caught. There it was again, the glimpse of the man beneath the empire, the one who wasn't bulletproof after all. But trust was a fragile thing, and hers had been shattered before. She wasn't sure she had the strength to rebuild it around someone like him. That night, as the villa glowed with lantern light, Elena stood on the terrace, staring at the sea. She wanted to believe what she had seen in him, wanted to believe he was more than his reputation. But Doubt gnawed at her. Damien joined her quietly, the sound of his footsteps barely audible over the surf. He didn't speak right away, just stood beside her, gazing at the horizon. Finally, he said, "You don't owe me anything. Not your trust, not your time. But before you decide, I'm just another headline. Remember this: sometimes the loudest battles aren't fought in boardrooms. Sometimes they're fought inside us." His words lingered in the night air, heavy and true. Elena's heart ached with the weight of them, torn between retreating to the safety of solitude and stepping into the storm of connection he offered. And as the moon climbed higher, silvering the restless sea, she realized she was standing on a threshold. One step would carry her back into silence. The other would pull her into something far more dangerous, something that could break her again, or remake her entirely. The next morning, the villa awoke not to birdsong, but to the low hum of voices outside the gates. Elena pulled back the curtains, her heart sinking as she caught sight of camera crews stationed at the edge of the property, long lenses pointed toward the glass walls, eager to catch even the smallest glimpse of the billionaire at war with his rivals. She closed the curtain quickly, pulse quickening. This was no longer the quiet retreat she had longed for. It was a spectacle, and no matter how much Damien had promised to protect her from it, she felt herself being pulled into its orbit. Damien was already awake, standing in the kitchen with a mug of untouched coffee, his eyes shadowed by exhaustion. He looked different this morning, stripped of the effortless confidence he wore like armor. There was tension in his jaw and alertness in his stance, as though he were bracing for a blow only he could see. "They're not leaving," Elena said. Quietly, "No," he admitted, setting the mug down with a soft clink. "Not until they get what they came for, and what they came for is blood." She frowned. "What do you mean?" He exhaled heavily, running a hand across his face. "The deal I've been working on, it's bigger than anything I've done before. Billions at stake, jobs, futures, entire industries waiting on the outcome. My competitors know if they can paint me as reckless or unstable, they'll have leverage to push me out. A photograph, a whisper, a single rumor, it's enough to shift everything. And I'm part of that risk." Elena realized aloud. His silence confirmed it. Her stomach twisted. She hadn't asked for this, not the spotlight, not the chaos. She had been a woman running from her own heartbreak, and now she was tangled in a battle she never chose. Anger rose in her, but beneath it was something more dangerous, fear that he might protect his empire at the cost of her dignity. "Then, maybe the answer is simple," she said, her voice steady though her chest tightened. "Distance yourself from me. Let them see you're focused on your empire, not whatever this is." Damien's head snapped up, his eyes flashing with something. No, Damien, no," he repeated firmly, stepping closer. "I've spent my life choosing the empire, sacrificing people, moments, pieces of myself, all in the name of power and security. And what has it given me? A glass cage. Loneliness dressed as success. I won't sacrifice you too." The words landed heavy, stealing Elena's breath. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust that she wasn't just another piece in a game far larger than herself. But trust had never come easily, not after the betrayal that had driven her here. "Words are easy," she whispered. "Anyone can say them. Then watch what I do," he said, his voice low and certain. That day became a test neither of them had expected. Damien left the villa to meet with reporters directly, despite his team's protests. Elena watched from a distance, heart pounding, as he stepped before the cameras with unshakable calm. They fired questions at him about the deal, about his rivals, about the mystery woman spotted in his company. Elena's cheeks burned at the implication, the way her name might soon be woven into gossip she wanted no part of. But Damien surprised her. He didn't deflect. He didn't hide. Instead, he redirected every question toward his work, his values, his responsibility to the people who relied on him. And when asked about her, he paused for a long moment, his gaze steady, then said only, "She is not a headline. She's not a scandal. She's someone whose privacy deserves more respect than you're giving her." The reporters pressed, but Damien didn't falter. He ended the conference on his own terms, walking away before they could twist his words. When he returned to the villa, his shirt damp from the humidity and his expression lined with fatigue. Elena saw more than just a billionaire in him. She saw a man who had chosen to fight differently, not with power, not with control, but with integrity. "You didn't have to do that," she said softly as he entered. "Yes, I did," he replied, his voice rough but steady. "Because for once, Elena, I wanted to build something real, not just towers of glass and steel, not just numbers on a screen, something that doesn't vanish when the cameras turn away." Her chest tightened, her defenses trembling. She wanted to resist, to tell herself this was temporary, a dangerous distraction. But the truth was etched in his eyes, in the exhaustion he carried, in the steadiness of his words. That evening, they sat together on the terrace, the sun bleeding into the horizon, painting the ocean in shades of fire and gold. For the first time, Elena didn't sit at the opposite end of the table. She sat close, close enough to feel the warmth of his presence, close enough to let herself imagine what it might mean if she stopped running. "You scare me," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Damien turned to her, his expression unguarded. "Why?" "Because you make me want to believe again." The confession hung between them, fragile and dangerous. Damien reached for her hand, not with the arrogance of a man who always got what he wanted, but with the gentleness of someone afraid of breaking something precious. "Then believe in me," he said simply. "Not the headlines, not the billionaire, just me." Elena's heart hammered, her doubts colliding with her hope. And as the last light of day gave way to twilight, she realized she stood at another crossroad. She could retreat into safety, guard the pieces of her heart that had survived betrayal, or she could step forward, risking everything, into the uncertain promise of something greater. For the first time, she didn't feel like running. The days that followed moved with a rhythm Elena could hardly recognize. The cameras eventually left the island, pushed away by Damien's firm refusal to play their game, and the quiet she had come seeking returned at last. But inside the villa, nothing was quiet. Every glance, every brush of a hand, every conversation carried the weight of something building between them, something she could no longer deny, no matter how much she tried. One evening, the resort hosted a small gathering for its guests. Lanterns strung along the beach, soft music drifting from hidden speakers, tables laden with tropical dishes. Elena had intended to skip it, preferring solitude to crowds. But Damien persuaded her with a simple, earnest request. "Just one night," he had said. "Not as the world sees me, just as myself." She hadn't been able to refuse. The beach was alive with laughter and light, the ocean glowing silver under the moon. Elena wore a simple white dress, her hair loose around her shoulders, and for once she didn't feel like the woman who had come here carrying heartbreak. She felt lighter, freer, as if some invisible weight had slipped from her shoulders. Damien, dressed in a linen shirt unbuttoned just enough to betray his ease, stayed close but never overbearing. He introduced her not as someone mysterious, not as a possession, but as Elena, just her dot. At one point, a guest recognized him and began to ask about his business. But Damien only smiled and redirected the conversation. "Tonight, I'm not here to talk about deals," he said. "I'm here to live." His gaze slid to Elena as he spoke, and the warmth in it made her heart ache with something she hadn't dared to feel in a long time. Hope. Later, when the music softened and the night grew still, Damien led her down the shore, away from the others. The sand was cool beneath their feet, the waves licking at their ankles as they walked in silence. Finally, he stopped, turning to face her with a seriousness that made her breath catch. "I told you before to believe in me," he said, his voice low and steady. "But belief is fragile. It's not enough for me to ask. I need to show you. So let me say this, Elena, if tomorrow every deal collapsed, if every dollar vanished, I would still be here, because for the first time in my life, I found something I'm not willing to lose, and that's you." Her chest tightened. She wanted to believe him, oh, how she wanted to, but fear clung stubbornly, reminding her of every wound she'd carried to this place. "You make it sound so simple," she whispered. "It's not simple," he admitted. "It's terrifying. But the difference is I'm not running from it anymore. Neither should you." The tide surged around their feet, cool and insistent, as if urging her to choose. Elena closed her eyes for a moment, the sounds of the night folding around her, She thought of the betrayal she had endured, the walls she had built, the solitude she had sought. And then she thought of the man before her, the one who had bared his scars without shame, who had stood against the world's noise to protect her name, who was offering not perfection, but truth. When she opened her eyes, Damien was still there, waiting, his hand outstretched. Slowly, trembling, she placed hers in his. The world seemed to shift. He drew her closer, his forehead resting against hers, their breaths mingling in the salt-kissed air. And when he kissed her this time, without surprise, without defiance, it was not the sharp spark of that first collision, but the steady flame of something lasting, a kiss that spoke of promises, of beginnings, of a future neither of them had expected but both were ready to fight for. The days after were different. Elena no longer counted the hours until she could leave the island. Instead, she found herself living them. She and Damien explored hidden coves, shared meals on sunlit terraces, laughed over stories of their pasts, and in the quiet moments when he read beside her, or when she painted while he watched the sea, she realized this wasn't just infatuation. This was healing. This was two lives, once broken, learning how to fit together without erasing the cracks. On their final night, Damien surprised her with a walk up the cliffs that overlooked the ocean. The path was lit with lanterns, the wind carrying the scent of wildflowers. At the summit, the view stretched endlessly, the stars spilling across the sky like scattered jewels. This, he said softly, standing beside her, is what I've been chasing all my life. Not money, not power, just a place where I can breathe and feel alive. And now that I've found it, I don't want to face it alone. He turned to her then, his eyes steady, vulnerable in a way she knew cost him everything. Stay, not just here, with me, wherever life takes us. Stay. Elena's throat tightened, tears stinging her eyes. For so long, she had believed her heart was too fractured to trust again. But standing here, with the sea roaring below and the stars burning above, she understood something she hadn't before. Love wasn't about erasing the storms. It was about finding someone who would stand beside you through them. Yes, she whispered, her voice breaking but certain. I'll stay. Damien's smile was small but radiant, the kind of smile that belonged not to a billionaire, but to a man who had finally found home. He pulled her into his arms, and together they stood at the edge of the world, the ocean and sky bearing witness to a promise that had been forged in fire, in storms. In the unlikeliest of beginnings, the slap had started their story. The kiss had rewritten it, but it was their choice, the choice to trust, to stay, to believe, that turned it into something unforgettable. And as the waves thundered against the cliffs below, Elena knew this was more than love. This was the life she had been searching for all along.